Jasmine Reynolds stares in disbelief as Captain Dwayne Harris removes his uniform jacket and pilot's cap, placing them deliberately on an empty seat. "This flight is canceled," he announces over the intercom, his voice steady but firm. Passengers gasp, confusion spreading like wildfire. Before we dive into this incredible story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like and subscribe button to join our community of storytellers. What would you do if you witnessed discrimination mid-flight? Let's find out what happened next. The morning had started with promise for Jasmine Reynolds. The 2-year-old marketing executive had spent the previous night finalizing slides for her presentation, her apartment floor scattered with research papers and coffee mugs. This wasn't just any business trip to Chicago. Landing the Williams account would bring millions to her company and secure the promotion she'd been working toward for 3 years. "Last call for checked baggage to Chicago," blared the announcement as Jasmine rushed through Atlanta International Airport, rolling her carry-on with one hand while balancing her laptop bag on her shoulder. She'd allowed extra time, knowing all too well that as a black woman, she often faced random security screenings. Sure enough, at the TSA checkpoint, Jasmine was pulled aside while several white business travelers breezed through. "Step over here, ma'am," the agent said, gesturing to the full-body scanner. Jasmine complied without comment, having learned that questioning these random selections only led to further delays. The female agent patted down Jasmine's hair, a familiar and uncomfortable intrusion that white colleagues rarely experienced. Jasmine maintained her composure, focusing instead on the Williams presentation. She couldn't afford to let minor injustices derail her day. After clearing security, Jasmine checked her watch still an hour before boarding. She made her way to gate B-17 where she spotted a familiar face. "Jerome, I didn't know we were on the same flight," she called out to her colleague, Jerome Washington, a fellow marketing team member who was accompanying her to the presentation. Jerome looked up from his phone, breaking into a wide smile. At 36, he'd been with the company 2 years longer than Jasmine and had become both mentor and friend. "Had to switch to an earlier flight," Jerome explained. "My wife needs the car tonight for Zoe's recital." As they discussed last-minute presentation adjustments, Jasmine noticed a family arriving at the gate, a couple with 3 children aged around 4, 7, and 10. The parents, Keith and Tamara Johnson, were clearly experienced travelers, efficiently organizing their carry-ons, while keeping the children engaged with books and small toys. "Reminds me of my sister's family," Jerome commented. "Always prepared for battle." At the counter gate, Agent Alicia Palmer began the boarding announcements. With a warm smile that seemed genuine despite the repetitive nature of her job, she called for passengers needing special assistance, followed by first-class passengers. "Now boarding our first-class passengers and Diamond Elite members," Alicia announced. Among the first to board was Richard Keller, a white man in his late 50s, wearing an expensive suit that screamed corporate executive. He brushed past the Johnson family, scowling as the youngest child accidentally bumped his briefcase. Jasmine noticed but thought little of it, just another businessman in a hurry. Alicia caught Jasmine's eye and gave a subtle nod of recognition. They'd chatted earlier when Jasmine had inquired about an upgrade, and though unsuccessful, the interaction had been pleasant. "Group 1 may now begin boarding," Alicia called. Jasmine and Jerome, both Group 1 due to their frequent flyer status, collected their belongings. The Johnson family was in the same group, gathering their children and various bags. "Remember, Trevor," inside voice on the plane, Tamara reminded her 7-year-old, who nodded solemnly. As they approached the jet bridge, Jasmine felt a flutter of anticipation. The Chicago presentation could change everything for her career. Little did she know that this flight would indeed be life-changing, but for entirely different reasons. "Ready to knock their socks off tomorrow?" Jerome asked as they stepped onto the plane. "They won't know what hit them," Jasmine replied with confidence, unaware that the true challenge of the day had nothing to do with marketing strategies. Flight attendant Brittany Cooper greeted passengers at the entrance with practiced efficiency. "Welcome aboard. First class is to your right. Main cabin continues to the left." As Jasmine and Jerome turned right toward first class a splurge, Jasmine had justified as necessary preparation space for the presentation. She noticed Richard Keller already seated in 2A, tapping impatiently on his phone. His eyes darted up as they approached, a flash of surprise and something darker crossing his features. "Excuse me," Jasmine said politely as she squeezed past to reach her window seat in row 3. Jerome settled into the aisle seat beside her, immediately pulling out his tablet to review their presentation once more. "We're going to crush this, Jazz," he said. "Williams won't know what hit them." Behind them, the Johnson family made their way to their seats in the first few rows of the main cabin. The children were excited but well-behaved, whispering about the adventure ahead. As the final first-class passengers boarded, Richard Keller's voice carried clearly from his seat. "Seems like standards are dropping these days," he remarked, to no one in particular, his gaze following Jasmine and Jerome. Jasmine tensed slightly but chose to ignore the comment. Today was too important to get derailed by casual racism. She pulled out her presentation notes, determined to stay focused on what really mattered. But as the main cabin continued boarding, she couldn't help but notice Richard's growing discomfort as more black passengers filed past. This flight to Chicago, a route between two diverse major cities, had a more representative mix of passengers than usual, and for some reason this seemed to bother him greatly. The seeds of conflict had been planted, though none of the passengers yet realized just how dramatically this routine flight was about to change course. Richard Keller shifted uncomfortably in his first-class seat as he watched the parade of passengers boarding the flight. His frown deepened each time another black passenger walked down the aisle. When Jasmine and Jerome had taken their first-class seats, his eyebrows had shot up in visible surprise. But now, as he counted at least a dozen black passengers in total, with several in premium sections, his expression had hardened into something uglier. "Excuse me," he flagged down flight attendant Brittany Cooper with a snap of his fingers. "Is this flight going to a special event or something?" Brittany looked confused. "I'm sorry, sir. There seemed to be an unusual number of them today," he said, lowering his voice, but not enough to prevent Jasmine from overhearing. He nodded discreetly toward Jasmine and Jerome. "Sir, I'm not sure what you mean," Brittany replied professionally. "Can I get you something to drink before takeoff?" Richard waved her away, returning to his phone with visible irritation. In row 3, Jasmine and Jerome exchanged knowing glances but continued their conversation about the Williams presentation. "I think we should lead with the market penetration statistics," Jerome suggested, scrolling through the slide deck. "Those numbers are impressive, even without context." "Agreed," Jasmine nodded, "but let's make sure to emphasize how quickly we achieved those results. That's what will set us apart from their current agency." Their professional discussion created a bubble of normalcy around them, a practiced defense mechanism against the discomfort radiating from Richard's seat. Several rows behind in the main cabin, the Johnson family settled into their seats. Keith secured the youngest child's seatbelt, while Tamara organized activities for the flight. "Mom, how much longer until we see Grandma?" asked their 10-year-old daughter Zoe. "Just a couple hours, sweetie." "We'll be in Chicago before you know it," Tamara answered, pulling out a tablet loaded with games and movies. Trevor, the middle child, bounced excitedly in his seat. "Can I sit by the window on the way back, please?" 4-year-old Mason clutched a small stuffed dinosaur, wide-eyed at the adventure of flying. The boarding process continued steadily until a slight technical delay was announced. Passengers already seated would need to remain on board while maintenance performed a routine check. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first officer speaking," came a voice over the intercom. "We're experiencing a slight delay as our maintenance team completes a standard safety check. We anticipate this will take approximately 20 minutes, and we ask that you remain seated at this time." A collective groan rose from the cabin. Richard Keller made his displeasure known immediately, pressing the call button repeatedly until Brittany returned to his seat. "Is this going to make us late? I have an important meeting," he demanded. "We're doing everything possible to maintain our schedule, sir," Brittany assured him. "Safety is our priority." As she moved away to assist other passengers, the cabin door opened again, revealing Captain Dwayne Harris conducting his pre-flight cabin check. At 45, Harris carried himself with the quiet confidence of his 15 years with the airline. His immaculate uniform and professional demeanor commanded respect as he nodded to passengers while making his way through the cabin. "Good afternoon, folks," he greeted several passengers personally. When he reached Jasmine and Jerome's row, his smile was warm and genuine. "Thanks for flying with us today." "Our pleasure," Captain Jerome replied. Captain Harris continued his round, briefly checking in with the Johnson family and complimenting the children on their good behavior. When he reached Richard Keller's seat, the executive barely looked up from his phone, offering only a curt nod. If the captain noticed the rudeness, he gave no indication, maintaining his professional demeanor before returning to the cockpit. As the minutes ticked by, the atmosphere in the cabin grew increasingly tense. The Johnson children, initially well-behaved, began to fidget after sitting still for nearly 45 minutes. "Mommy, I'm bored," whined Mason, his voice carrying through the cabin. "I know, sweetie. Just a little longer," Tamara whispered, pulling out another activity book from her seemingly bottomless bag of distractions. Richard Keller's head snapped around, his annoyance evident. He pressed the call button again. Brittany appeared quickly. "Yes, sir." "I paid for a premium experience," Richard hissed, not bothering to lower his voice. "Can't someone control those children?" Brittany glanced back at the Johnson family, who were doing everything possible to keep their children entertained during the extended wait. "Sir, they're actually being quite well-behaved, considering the delay," she said diplomatically. "Well-behaved? By what standard?" Richard scoffed. "This isn't a playground. Some of us have important business to conduct." His voice carried clearly to surrounding seats. Jasmine noticed several passengers shift uncomfortably, while others pretended to be absorbed in books or devices, the universal signal of wanting no part in the brewing conflict. As Brittany tried to defuse the situation, Richard's phone rang. He answered immediately, his voice much louder than necessary. "Yeah, I'm still stuck on the plane. You wouldn't believe it here. The whole place is filled with those people," he said, making no attempt to disguise his meaning. "Standards have really gone downhill. There's a family behind me that can't control their kids, and they've got some of them up in first class now, too." Jasmine and Jerome exchanged glances again, their earlier excitement about the presentation now overshadowed by the familiar weight of dealing with racism in public spaces. It was a calculation they'd both made countless times: speak up and risk escalation, or maintain dignity through silence. The decision was made for them when 4-year-old Mason Johnson began crying softly, overwhelmed by the long wait and sensing the tension in the cabin. "That's it," Richard snapped, unbuckling his seatbelt and standing up despite the illuminated seatbelt sign. "Excuse me," he called loudly to Brittany, who was assisting another passenger. "I need to speak to the captain immediately about the quality of passengers on this flight." The cabin fell silent as all eyes turned toward the confrontation. Brittany approached cautiously. "Sir, I need you to return to your seat. The seatbelt sign is still illuminated." "Not until I speak with whoever's in charge," Richard insisted. "This is unacceptable." Brittany maintained her professional composure, though her smile had long since disappeared. "Sir, please return to your seat, and I'll see if the captain is available to address your concerns once we're airborne." "That's not good enough," Richard countered, his voice rising. "Either you handle this situation with these people, or I speak to the captain now." The racial undertones of these people hung in the air, impossible to ignore. Jasmine felt her heart rate increase, the familiar fight-or-flight response to public racism kicking in. Jerome placed a calming hand on her arm, his expression conveying a clear message. "Let's see how the crew handles this." After a few more tense exchanges, Brittany reluctantly headed toward the cockpit, leaving Richard standing triumphantly in the aisle, arms crossed over his chest. Finally, he muttered loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Someone's going to restore some order around here." The atmosphere in the cabin had transformed completely. What had started as routine travel annoyance had exposed an ugly undercurrent that now threatened to define the entire journey. As Brittany disappeared into the cockpit, passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances, wondering what would happen next. No one expected what followed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the continued delay," the first officer's voice crackled over the intercom. "Our maintenance check is taking longer than anticipated. We ask for your patience as we ensure the aircraft is in perfect working order before departure. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The announcement triggered a wave of sighs throughout the cabin. 45 minutes had passed since the initial delay announcement, and passenger patience was wearing thin. Richard Keller, who had reluctantly returned to his seat at Brittany's insistence, immediately pulled out his phone again. "You won't believe this," he said loudly into the device. "Still stuck here with these people. Whole airline's gone to hell." He made no attempt to disguise his disdain, his gaze deliberately sweeping toward Jasmine and Jerome. In the main cabin, the Johnson children were beginning to struggle with the extended confinement. 10-year-old Zoe remained absorbed in her book, but 7-year-old Trevor had exhausted his tablet's battery, and 4-year-old Mason was growing increasingly restless. "Dinosaur-hungry," Mason announced, making his stuffed toy walk along the armrest. Indoor voice Mason Keith reminded gently, though the tension in his own voice betrayed his awareness of the hostile atmosphere developing. Mason lowered his voice to a stage whisper. "Dinosaur hungry," he repeated, bouncing the toy slightly. Richard Keller twisted in his seat, glaring over his shoulder. "For God's sake," he muttered audibly. Tamara Johnson leaned forward, trying to engage Mason with a coloring book, acutely aware of the daggers being stared in their direction. "Look, sweetie. Want to color the spaceship." But Mason had reached his limit. "No color, want to move," he wailed, the sudden outburst causing several passengers to jump. Richard slammed his phone down on his tray table. "That's it," he announced, standing up again despite the illuminated seatbelt sign. He marched back 3 rows to confront the Johnson family directly. "Some of us paid good money for this flight," he said, looming over them. "Control your child, or take another flight." Keith Johnson straightened in his seat, his expression a careful mask of control. "Sir, we're doing our best. He's 4 years old and has been sitting still for nearly an hour." "That's not my problem," Richard replied coldly. "If you can't teach them how to behave in public, leave them at home." The underlying message was clear to everyone within earshot. This wasn't just about noisy children. "Excuse me," Jasmine's voice cut through the tension as she approached from first class. "I have some puzzles in my bag that might help." She addressed the Johnsons directly, deliberately positioning herself between Richard and the family. "I'd be happy to share them," she continued, her voice warm as she knelt beside Mason. "I have a nephew about your age who loves dinosaurs too." Mason's tears subsided slightly as he regarded this new potential ally. Really, Jasmine confirmed, reaching into her carry-on to produce a small travel puzzle book. "Want to try this one? It has dinosaurs." Richard's face contorted with indignation at being sidestepped. "This isn't about entertainment," he spat. "It's about certain people knowing their place and how to behave." The cabin grew painfully quiet as the comment hung in the air, its racist implication impossible to ignore. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably, while others stared deliberately out windows or at screens. Jerome had joined Jasmine in the aisle. "Friend," he said calmly to Richard, "why don't we all take a breath? We're all stuck here together." "I'm not your friend," Richard retorted. "And I didn't pay for first class to be surrounded by you people who clearly don't belong there." A white woman across the aisle gasped audibly. An older white gentleman 2 rows back removed his headphones, frowning at the escalating situation. "What exactly do you mean by you people?" Jerome asked, his voice still measured but with an edge of steel beneath. "You know exactly what I mean," Richard shot back. "Affirmative action may get you into first class, but it doesn't teach you how to act once you're there." Brittany returned from the cockpit, rushing down the aisle. "Sir, you need to return to your seat immediately." "Not until something is done about this situation," Richard insisted. "Either control these people or move me to another section." "These people," Jasmine repeated, her professional composure finally cracking. "Do you mean business travelers, parents? Or are you specifically referring to black passengers?" Richard's expression confirmed what everyone already knew. "I mean people who don't know how to conduct themselves properly in public." Draw whatever conclusions you want." Jerome placed a restraining hand on Jasmine's shoulder as he saw her body tense. "Let the crew handle this," he murmured. Brittany stepped between them. "Sir, this is your final warning to return to your seat or I'll need to involve the captain." "Perfect," Richard sneered. "That's exactly who I want to talk to. Someone needs to restore order on this flight." As if on cue, a young white woman several rows back had begun filming discreetly on her phone. Other passengers watched the confrontation with expressions ranging from discomfort to outrage. "I'll get the captain," Brittany said tightly, turning back toward the cockpit. Richard smirked triumphantly at Jasmine and Jerome. "We'll see who belongs where once someone with authority gets involved." In those tense moments, waiting for the captain, alliances formed silently throughout the cabin. Some passengers avoided eye contact, unwilling to be drawn into the conflict. Others, like an elderly black woman in the second row of main cabin, watched Jasmine and Jerome with expressions of sorrowful familiarity, the look of someone who had witnessed this scene play out countless times over decades. A few white passengers nodded encouragingly at the Johnsons' small gestures of solidarity. One middle-aged white woman passed a packet of cookies to Tamara with a whispered, "Your children are being wonderful." Jasmine returned to her seat, hands trembling slightly with suppressed anger. The Williams presentation that had seemed so important an hour ago now felt trivial compared to this all-too-familiar battle. 20 years of education, professional achievements, and I still have to prove I belong in first class, she whispered to Jerome as they waited. "He's just one sad, angry man," Jerome replied, though they both knew it was more than that. It was a system, a persistent undercurrent in American life that could surface anywhere, anytime, even at 30,000 feet. The cockpit door opened and Captain Dwayne Harris emerged. His expression was neutral but resolute as he surveyed the cabin, immediately assessing the situation. The next moments would change everything. Captain Dwayne Harris stood in the center of the aisle, his presence immediately commanding attention throughout the cabin. At 6'2", with broad shoulders and a dignified bearing, he cut an imposing figure even without saying a word. The captain's uniform, with 4 gold stripes on each sleeve, added to his authority as he surveyed the tense scene before him. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, his deep voice resonant and controlled. "I understand there's a situation that needs addressing. I'm Captain Harris." Richard Keller stepped forward immediately. "Finally, someone in charge," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Captain, I need to speak with you about the passenger situation on this flight." Captain Harris nodded professionally. "Of course, sir. May I have your name?" "Richard Keller, Executive Vice President at Meridian Financial." He emphasized his title clearly, expecting it to carry weight. "Thank you, Mr. Keller." "Now, what seems to be the issue?" Captain Harris asked, his tone neutral yet authoritative. Richard gestured around the cabin. "The issue, Captain, is that the quality of passengers has severely declined. That family can't control their children. These people," he motioned toward Jasmine and Jerome, "are disrupting the first-class experience, and nobody on your crew seems concerned about maintaining standards." Captain Harris's expression remained professionally impassive. "I see. Could you clarify what you mean by these people, Mr. Keller?" Richard hesitated for a split second, aware of the many eyes watching. "People who don't know how to behave appropriately in premium sections of the aircraft." "And what behavior specifically has been inappropriate?" Harris pressed, his voice still calm. "The noise, for one thing. The entitlement. The entire atmosphere has changed," Richard complained, gesturing vaguely. Captain Harris turned slightly to address the Johnson family. "Ma'am, sir, how are you and your children doing today?" Tamara Johnson straightened in her seat. "We're managing, Captain. The delay has been difficult for the children, but we're doing our best." Harris nodded. "I understand. Delays are tough on everyone, especially the little ones." He looked at Mason, who was now quietly examining the puzzle book Jasmine had given him. "That's a cool dinosaur you've got there, young man." Mason looked up shyly. "T-Rex," he whispered. Captain Harris smiled briefly before turning back to Richard. Mr. Keller, our records show the Johnson family has proper tickets for their seats, as do Miss Reynolds and Mr. Washington in first class. Everyone aboard has met our requirements for travel." As Captain Harris spoke, Jasmine couldn't help but notice a subtle shift in his demeanor. Behind his professional facade, something personal seemed to flicker a momentary window into lived experience. For Dwayne Harris, this confrontation triggered memories stretching back through his 15-year career with the airline. He'd started as a young first officer, one of only 3 black pilots in his training cohort. The journey to Captain's Stripes had been marked by excellence and obstacles others never faced. He recalled the passenger who had refused to board upon seeing him in the cockpit, the evaluator who'd graded him more harshly than his white colleagues, the constant pressure to be twice as good, twice as calm, twice as professional. His grandfather, one of the famed Tuskegee Airmen who fought for America while facing segregation at home, had warned him, "They'll question your right to be there. Answer with excellence." Those words had become his North Star. Now, facing another challenge to who belonged where, Harris maintained his professional composure while making a clear statement with his presence. Mr. Keller, Harris continued, "I can offer you alternative seating if you're uncomfortable in your current location. We have several open seats in the middle section of the main cabin." Richard's face flushed with indignation. "That's your solution, to move ME rather than address the real problem." "The only issue I'm seeing, sir, is your discomfort with certain passengers," Harris replied evenly. "Since I can't change who has rightfully purchased tickets for specific seats, I'm offering you an alternative." "This is outrageous," Richard sputtered. "I want these people removed from first class, or I want a full refund." Captain Harris shook his head slightly. "I'm afraid I can't do either of those things, sir. Every passenger who has purchased a ticket for a specific seat has the right to occupy that seat, regardless of race, gender, or any other characteristic." The word race hung in the air. Until this moment, no airline employee had directly acknowledged the underlying issue. Richard's expression hardened. "So, that's what this is about. You're making this a racial issue." "No, sir," Harris replied firmly. "You made it a racial issue when you repeatedly referred to black passengers as these people and questioned their right to be in certain sections of the aircraft." A murmur ran through the cabin. Several passengers nodded in agreement. "This is absurd," Richard declared, voice rising. "I'm a Diamond Elite member with over 1 million miles. I'll have your job for this." Captain Harris remained unruffled. "Mr. Keller, you have 3 options at this point. You can return to your assigned seat and complete the journey without further disruption. You can accept my offer of alternative seating, or you can choose not to travel with us today and book with another carrier." "And if I refuse all 3? Richard challenged. "Then I would be forced to consider you a disruptive passenger, which could result in removal from the aircraft," Harris explained calmly. Jasmine discreetly began recording on her phone, sensing the historical weight of the moment. Across the aisle, Jerome watched with a mixture of satisfaction and wariness, too familiar with how these situations could escalate or be rewritten later. Richard looked around the cabin, seemingly expecting support from fellow passengers. He found mostly averted gazes and uncomfortable expressions. "This is your final decision," Richard demanded of the captain. "You're choosing them over a loyal, high-value customer." Captain Harris's expression remained professional. "I'm not choosing anyone over anyone else, sir. I'm simply enforcing our airline's non-discrimination policy, which clearly states that all passengers have equal rights to the services they've purchased." Richard pointed accusingly at the Johnson family. "What about their disruptive children? What about the noise? Their children have been remarkably well-behaved, considering the extended delay," Harris noted. "The only passenger I've observed being disruptive is you, sir." A few passengers nodded in agreement. The older white gentleman who had removed his headphones earlier spoke up. "The captain's right. Those kids have been good as gold. You're the one making a scene." Richard turned to the man in disbelief. "You're taking their side." "There shouldn't be sides," the man replied. "We're all just trying to get to Chicago." Captain Harris stepped back slightly. "Mr. Keller, I need your decision now. We've delayed this flight long enough." Richard glared at the captain, then at Jasmine and Jerome, and finally at the Johnson family. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "I'll stay in my seat, but this isn't over. Your supervisors will hear about this, and so will your airline's executive team." "That's your right," Captain Harris acknowledged with a slight nod. "Now, please return to your seat and fasten your seatbelt. We'll be preparing for departure shortly." As Richard reluctantly returned to his first-class seat, Captain Harris approached the Johnson family briefly. "Thank you for your patience. Can we get anything for your children while we finish our preparations?" "We're fine, thank you, Captain Keith Johnson," replied visible relief in his expression. "We appreciate your intervention." Captain Harris nodded, then stopped by Jasmine and Jerome's seats on his way back to the cockpit. "I apologize for the disturbance," he said quietly. "We should be underway soon." "Thank you, Captain," Jasmine replied, genuine gratitude in her voice for more than just the update on departure time. As Captain Harris returned to the cockpit, a nervous energy remained in the cabin. Richard sat rigidly in his seat, periodically shooting glares toward Jasmine, Jerome, and the Johnson family. The confrontation appeared to be over, but the tension lingered like static electricity, dangerous potential still crackling in the air. Flight attendant Brittany moved through the cabin, checking seatbelts and tray tables with renewed efficiency, clearly eager to get the delayed flight finally airborne. "Looks like that's sorted," Jerome murmured to Jasmine. "Not the first time, won't be the last." Jasmine nodded, though something in Captain Harris's expression as he'd returned to the cockpit gave her pause. There had been a flicker of something determination or perhaps resignation that suggested the situation might not be fully resolved. The intercom crackled to life, and passengers prepared for the standard pre-takeoff announcements. Instead, Captain Harris's voice came through with a message no one expected. "What do you think Captain Harris will do next? Comment 1 if you think he'll take off normally now that Richard has returned to his seat. Comment 2 if you believe he'll take further action against Richard. Comment 3 if you think he might do something completely unexpected. Hit that like button if you appreciate a captain who stands up for what's right, and subscribe to catch the shocking moment coming up next." What would you do in Captain Harris's position? Would you prioritize getting the flight back on schedule, or would you draw a line in the sand against discrimination? The captain's next move will change everyone's lives. Forever. The intercom fell silent for several long seconds after Captain Harris's voice cut off, creating an atmosphere of suspended anticipation throughout the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances, the earlier confrontation still reverberating in the confined space of the aircraft. Outside the windows, ground crew members moved about on the tarmac, oblivious to the drama unfolding inside. A baggage cart drove past. Another plane taxied in the distance. The ordinary business of the airport continued, while inside Flight 1382, time seemed to stand still. Jasmine Reynolds checked her phone, calculating the impact of the delay on her Chicago presentation. If they took off within the next 30 minutes, she could still make it, though, with minimal preparation time. She texted her boss. "Flight delayed. Will update on arrival time. Presentation materials ready regardless." The response came quickly. "Keep me posted. Williams' team expecting full presentation at 3 p.m. sharp." Jasmine exhaled slowly, the professional pressure mounting alongside the emotional strain of the past hour. Jerome noticed her expression and gave her hand a quick, supportive squeeze. "We'll make it," he assured her, though uncertainty shadowed his voice. 3 rows behind them, the Johnson family had reached a difficult decision. Keith leaned across the aisle toward his wife. "Maybe we should just get off," he whispered to Tamara. "Take another flight. This isn't worth putting the kids through." Tamara glanced at their children. Zoe, their 10-year-old, was old enough to understand what had happened, and her expression was a mixture of confusion and hurt. Trevor pretended to be absorbed in a magazine, but his tight grip on the pages betrayed his awareness. Even 4-year-old Mason had grown unnaturally quiet, sensing the tension around him. "They'll think we did something wrong," Tamara whispered back. "I don't want the kids to learn that you walk away when someone treats you unfairly." Their hushed conversation was interrupted when a white passenger across the aisle, a woman in her 40s who had remained silent during the earlier confrontation, leaned toward them. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "my kids and I would be disappointed if your family left. You have every right to be here." Near the front of the cabin, Richard Keller sat rigidly in his first-class seat, tapping furiously on his phone. His earlier smugness had calcified into righteous indignation. He believed the captain would ultimately side with a Diamond Elite member. Airlines always prioritized their highest-tier customers in the end. The confrontation had been unpleasant, but he remained convinced of his eventual vindication. In row 9, Jerome turned to confront another white passenger who had muttered something supportive of Richard's position. "Excuse me," Jerome asked, his voice controlled but challenging. "I'm just saying," the man replied, not quite meeting Jerome's eyes. "Some people pay extra for a certain experience. It's not about race." "If it's not about race," Jerome countered, "then why were his complaints only directed at black passengers? There's a crying baby in row 14 he didn't mention. There's a loud businessman on his phone in row 7 he ignored." The man shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I'm not taking sides." "Not taking sides is taking a side," Jerome said firmly. "It always has been." Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Dwayne Harris sat in the left seat, staring at the instrument panel without really seeing it. His first officer, Mark Stevens, watched him with growing concern. "What are you thinking?" Captain Mark finally asked. Harris's mind flashed back to his grandfather's stories of being a decorated Tuskegee airman who had fought for his country only to return home and be denied service at restaurants. Of training white pilots who would be promoted ahead of him. Of maintaining dignity in the face of constant indignities. He thought of his own journey through the airline industry, the extra scrutiny, the passed-over promotions, the passengers who occasionally requested another pilot upon seeing him in the cockpit. He thought of his children and what world he wanted them to inherit. Most of all, he thought about what message his decision would send to everyone on the aircraft, particularly the Johnson children who were learning important lessons about justice and belonging in real time. "I'm thinking about where to draw the line," Harris finally answered. "I've let a lot of things slide over the years. We all have. It's part of the job, part of life. But at some point," he trailed off, then picked up the intercom handset. His decision was made. Back in the cabin, the intercom crackled to life. Passengers looked up expectantly, anticipating the standard pre-departure announcements. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Harris speaking." His voice was calm and measured, giving no immediate indication of what was to come. "I want to take a moment to address the situation that occurred before boarding. As the captain of this aircraft, I have both the authority and responsibility to ensure the safety and dignity of all passengers and crew members." Throughout the cabin, conversations ceased. All eyes turned toward the speakers. "Our airline has a strict non-discrimination policy that is outlined in our contract of carriage, a document all passengers agree to when purchasing a ticket. This policy states that discriminatory behavior toward any passenger or crew member will not be tolerated." In first class, Richard Keller's expression darkened. He put his phone down slowly. "After careful consideration and consultation with our ground team, I have determined that the discriminatory comments and behavior exhibited today violated that policy." A murmur ran through the cabin. Jasmine and Jerome exchanged glances of surprise. "Therefore, I am making the following announcement. Flight 1382 to Chicago is canceled effective immediately." Gasps erupted throughout the cabin. A flight attendant at the back visibly startled. "All passengers will be reaccommodated on other flights today and tomorrow. Our gate agents will assist with rebooking once you have deplaned. I sincerely apologize for the inconvenience this causes the majority of you who did not participate in or condone the discriminatory behavior." Richard stood up immediately. "This is outrageous. You can't cancel an entire flight because of a minor disagreement." Captain Harris continued over the intercom, ignoring the outburst. "I understand this decision impacts many innocent passengers, and for that, I am truly sorry. However, as captain, I cannot and will not operate an aircraft where the dignity and humanity of any person on board has been compromised." He paused briefly before concluding. "Please gather your belongings and prepare to deplane in an orderly fashion." Gate agents will assist with rebooking. Again, I apologize for the inconvenience. The silence that followed was profound, a collective holding of breath as passengers processed what had just happened. Then, like a dam breaking the cabin, erupted in reactions. "He can't do this. Is this legal? What about my connection? Good for him. This is ridiculous." Flight attendants moved through the cabin attempting to maintain order as the situation evolved from tense to chaotic. Brittany approached the cockpit door, presumably to confer with the captain. Jasmine sat stunned, her Chicago presentation now certainly jeopardized. Yet, alongside the professional anxiety, she felt something else, a vindication so rare and powerful, it almost brought tears to her eyes. In the main cabin, the Johnson children looked to their parents for explanation. Keith and Tamara whispered assurances while processing their own complex emotions about the unprecedented stand taken on their behalf. Richard Keller stormed toward the front of the aircraft, phone in hand. "I'm calling your corporate office right now. You'll never fly again after this stunt." A ground supervisor had been summoned and now stood at the aircraft door, absorbing the situation. Then, with perfect dramatic timing, the cockpit door opened. Captain Dwayne Harris emerged, his expression solemn but resolved. The cabin fell silent again as all eyes turned to him. Slowly, deliberately, he removed his uniform jacket and captain's hat. He placed them carefully on an empty first-class seat, the visual echo of the scene described in the opening hook. "This flight is canceled," he repeated, his voice steady and firm, no longer needing the intercom to command attention. In that moment, the abstract notion of taking a stand transformed into something literal and powerful. Captain Harris stood in the aisle, stripped of the symbols of his authority, but somehow more authoritative than before. Passengers watched in stunned silence, witnessing something none of them had seen in countless flights. A moment of raw moral clarity, cutting through the routine transactionalism of air travel. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the distant rumble of aircraft outside and the soft hum of the auxiliary power unit. It was, in every sense, a moment of suspension, both physical and ethical, as 143 people hovered together somewhere between departure and arrival, between complacency and courage, between what was and what could be. The suspended moment of silence shattered as Richard Keller lunged forward, pointing an accusatory finger at Captain Harris. "This is illegal. You can't hold passengers hostage because of your personal politics." His face had turned an alarming shade of red, veins visible on his forehead. The ground supervisor, a woman named Melinda Taylor, according to her name badge, stepped between Richard and the captain. "Sir, please lower your voice. No one is being held hostage. We're initiating standard protocols for a canceled flight." "Standard protocols," Richard scoffed. "There's nothing standard about canceling a flight because someone hurt your feelings." He turned to address the cabin at large. "Who else is going to file a complaint about this outrageous behavior? This man should never fly again." He looked around expectantly, waiting for a chorus of agreement. Instead, he found a sea of uncomfortable expressions and averted gazes. A few passengers nodded hesitantly, but most remained still, unwilling to align themselves with his outburst. Captain Harris stood calmly, his demeanor unchanged, despite having removed his uniform jacket. "Mr. Keller, every passenger will be fully accommodated on alternative flights. Our gate agents are preparing those arrangements now." "That's not good enough," Richard shot back. "I want your name and employee number. I'm calling your CEO directly. Dwayne Harris, Captain Employee number 37429. Harris replied without hesitation. "Our corporate contact information is available on our website and through our customer service department." The straightforward response seemed to further infuriate Richard. "You think you're untouchable. You have no idea who I am or who I know in this industry." From the middle of the cabin, a young woman raised her phone, clearly recording. "I've got the whole thing on video," she called out. "Started filming when he first made those comments about the black passengers." Richard whirled toward her. "Put that phone down. You don't have permission to record me." "Actually, sir," Melinda interjected, "there's no expectation of privacy in a public commercial aircraft. Our own security cameras are also recording." As this confrontation unfolded at the front of the plane, a remarkable shift was occurring throughout the rest of the cabin. Passengers had begun talking across aisles and rows, the shared extraordinary experience, breaking down the usual isolation of air travel. "Did you hear what he said earlier about those people? I've never seen anything like this in 30 years of flying. The captain actually took a stand. My connection is shot, but I'm not even mad." In row 16, a corporate lawyer traveling to Chicago explained to those around him, "The captain has absolute authority over the aircraft. It's in federal aviation regulations." Near the back, two flight attendants whispered urgently, clearly concerned about their own positions in this unprecedented situation. Jasmine's phone buzzed with a message from her boss. "No update, Williams' team is asking." She stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. The presentation that had seemed so crucial hours ago now felt distant and small compared to the human drama unfolding around her. She began typing, "Flight canceled due to discrimination incident, working on alternatives." Before she could send it, Jerome touched her arm. "Look," he said, nodding toward the front of the plane. Captain Harris was making his way deliberately toward the Johnson family. He crouched down to eye level with the children. "I want to apologize to you and your family," he said, his voice just loud enough for nearby rows to hear. "What happened today shouldn't have happened, and I'm sorry you had to experience it." 10-year-old Zoe looked at him with serious eyes. "Why did that man not want us on the plane? We weren't being bad." The question hung in the air, its innocent directness, cutting through the adult complexities to the painful heart of the matter. Captain Harris took a moment before answering. "It wasn't about being good or bad. Sometimes people have wrong ideas about others based on how they look. It's not fair, and it's not right." "Then why do they do it?" 7-year-old Trevor asked. "That's a very good question," Harris replied. "One that a lot of grown-ups are still trying to answer." 4-year-old Mason, clutching his dinosaur, asked the simplest, yet perhaps most profound question. "Aren't we all just people?" A sad smile crossed Harris's face. "Yes, we are. And don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise." As this quiet exchange took place, corporate mechanisms had begun grinding into motion. Melinda was now on her phone with operations management. Flight attendants distributed vouchers for meal and accommodation where needed. Gate agents had appeared at the aircraft door ready to assist with rebooking. Social media was already ablaze. The young woman who had been recording Alyssa Chen, according to her online profile, had posted a clip with the caption, "Captain cancels entire flight after racist passenger harasses black families. Number captain stands, number respect. Number airline hero." Within minutes, the video had hundreds of shares. Within an hour, it would have thousands. Richard, seeing his public support evaporating and the story spinning beyond his control, changed tactics. He lowered his voice and approached Melinda. "Look, I think this has gotten out of hand," he said with forced reasonableness. "I'm willing to apologize if it means we can get this flight moving again." Melinda shook her head. "I'm sorry, sir, but the captain's decision is final. The flight is canceled." "This is going to be a PR nightmare for your airline," Richard warned. "That's for our corporate communications team to address," she replied evenly. "Right now, my priority is getting everyone rebooked." As passengers began to gather their belongings preparing to deplane, Jasmine found herself facing a difficult professional reality. There was no way she would make it to Chicago in time for the Williams presentation. She dialed her boss directly, bracing for the conversation. "Martin, it's Jasmine. The situation here is complicated." She explained briefly what had transpired. "You're telling me your flight was canceled because of a racism incident?" Martin sounded incredulous. "Yes. The captain took a stand against a passenger who was harassing black families, including Jerome and me." A pause. "Is this getting media attention?" "It's already trending on social media. A passenger recorded it." Another longer pause. "Are you visible in the recording?" Jasmine hadn't considered this angle. I'm not sure. Possibly." "This changes things," Martin said thoughtfully. The Williams Group has been very public about their diversity initiatives. Having our team caught in a viral racial justice moment might actually work in our favor." Jasmine felt a complex mix of emotions at this calculated response, relief about her job security tangled with unease at the commodification of what had been a deeply personal experience. "I'll call the Williams team," Martin continued. "Don't worry about today's meeting. Focus on getting to Chicago safely and we'll reschedule. This could actually be an opportunity for us." As Jasmine ended the call, she noticed Jerome organizing a group of passengers who had approached Captain Harris. They formed an impromptu line, many shaking his hand or offering words of support. "I've been flying for 40 years," an elderly white man told Harris, "and I've never seen such integrity from a captain." "My daughter is watching everything I do," said a young mother, gesturing to her child. "Thank you for showing her that standing up for others matters." Not everyone was supportive. A businessman with a tight schedule brushed past, muttering about performative wokeness ruining everything. A few passengers pointedly avoided eye contact with Harris, clearly disapproving of his decision. Meanwhile, Richard Keller was being escorted from the aircraft by airport security, not for the original incident, but for his subsequent disruptive behavior after the cancellation announcement. "This isn't over," he called back over his shoulder. "You'll be hearing from my attorneys." As he was led away, Jasmine caught Brittany, the flight attendant, rolling her eyes. Their glances met, and they shared a moment of silent understanding. The scene in the jetway and gate area was controlled chaos as agents worked to rebook passengers. Some were angry about the disruption, demanding compensation. Others recounted the events to newcomers, each telling slightly embellished versions of the story. Captain Harris was the last to leave the aircraft, walking slowly down the aisle with his uniform items folded neatly over his arm. He paused briefly at Jasmine and Jerome's row. "I'm sorry about your travel plans," he said sincerely. "Don't be," Jerome replied. "Some things are more important than schedules." Harris nodded, a weight visible on his shoulders, despite the rightness of his decision. "Safe travels," he said, continuing toward the exit. As he stepped into the jetway, Harris knew this day would have consequences for his career, for the airline, for every person aboard Flight 1382. Whether those consequences would be positive or negative remained to be seen, but in that moment, watching the respect in the Johnson children's eyes as he passed their seats, he felt certain he had made the only choice he could live with. The aircraft door closed behind him, ending one chapter of the story. But as passengers dispersed throughout the terminal, some rebooking, some calling loved ones, some posting on social media, it was clear that the ripple effects were just beginning. The scene in Terminal B of Atlanta International Airport transformed rapidly from the controlled environment of an ordinary pre-departure gate to something resembling a small-scale crisis management center. Gate agents who had been casually checking boarding passes 30 minutes earlier now found themselves at the epicenter of a situation that was quickly spiraling beyond routine customer service. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced lead gate agent Derek Wilson, his voice straining to be heard over the growing commotion, "we understand your frustration. Our team is working to rebook everyone as quickly as possible. Priority will be given to those with connecting flights and special circumstances." The assembled crowd of displaced passengers from Flight 1382 responded with a mixture of grumbles and resigned sighs. Several people thrust their phones forward, already displaying alternative flight options they'd found themselves. Jasmine Reynolds stood slightly apart from the main crowd, phone pressed to her ear as she coordinated with her company's travel department. The Williams presentation was officially postponed, but she still needed to get to Chicago. "Yes, I understand you're checking all airlines. No, I don't mind a connection. Tomorrow morning would be acceptable if nothing else is available." She caught Jerome's eye across the gate area where he was speaking with another group of passengers, and they exchanged tired smiles of solidarity. Near the customer service desk, airline representatives huddled in intense discussion with supervisors who had been summoned to the gate. One pointed toward her tablet where social media feeds showed number Captain Stands and number Flight 1382 already trending nationally. Corporate communications wants a statement in the next 30 minutes, a harried-looking manager informed his team. They're convening an emergency meeting now. The chaotic scene attracted the attention of other travelers passing through the terminal. They slowed their pace, trying to discern what had caused such a disruption. Some pulled out phones, adding to the growing documentation of the incident. "Excuse me," a woman with press credentials approached Jasmine. "I'm Kelly Martinez with ANC News. Can you tell me what happened on your flight?" Before Jasmine could respond, a uniformed airline representative intervened. "Miss Martinez, we'll be issuing an official statement shortly. Please direct all media inquiries to our communications office." The journalist nodded but handed Jasmine a business card anyway. "If you'd like to share your experience, call me." Across the terminal, Richard Keller sat in the airport security office, facing two stern TSA officers and an airline security representative. His earlier bluster had diminished considerably. "Mr. Keller, we've reviewed the initial reports from the flight crew," the airline security representative explained. "Several passengers have provided statements alleging discriminatory and disruptive behavior." "This is absurd," Richard protested, though with less conviction than before. "I was expressing concerns about service standards, nothing more." "We have video evidence suggesting otherwise," replied the representative coolly. "At this time, the airline is reviewing whether to place you on our restricted passenger list." The color drained from Richard's face. "Restricted list? That would devastate my business travel." "Perhaps you should have considered that before disrupting an entire flight," the TSA officer commented dryly. Back at the gate, the Johnson family had been given priority rebooking due to traveling with young children. Keith Johnson knelt beside his children, trying to explain the situation in terms they could understand. "Sometimes people have to make hard choices to stand up for what's right," he told them. "That's what the captain did today." "Because of the mean man?" 4-year-old Mason asked, still clutching his dinosaur toy. "Yes," Tamara answered carefully. "The captain wanted to make sure everyone on the plane was treated with respect." 10-year-old Zoe looked thoughtful. "My teacher says Rosa Parks did something like that on a bus." Keith and Tamara exchanged surprised glances at their daughter's perceptive connection. "That's right, honey," Keith said. "Sometimes it takes one person to stand up and say, 'Enough.'" The family's conversation was interrupted by the appearance of news cameras at the terminal entrance. Word of the incident had reached local media outlets, and the first reporters had arrived, seeking first-hand accounts. The airline staff, recognizing the growing media presence, quickly established a press area away from the rebooking counters. A spokesperson in a crisp corporate suit appeared, flanked by security personnel. "Atlantic Airways is aware of an incident that occurred on Flight 1382, she began reading from prepared notes. "The flight was canceled due to operational concerns, and passengers are being accommodated on alternative flights. We take all reports of discrimination seriously and are investigating the matter. No further statements will be provided until our internal review is complete." The assembled journalists immediately shouted follow-up questions. Was the captain authorized to cancel the flight? Is it true a passenger made racist comments? What is Atlantic Airways' policy on discrimination? The spokesperson repeated her statement and retreated, ignoring the barrage of questions. Meanwhile, in a secured area of the terminal, Captain Dwayne Harris sat in a conference room with airline operations executives who had been hastily summoned to address the situation. His uniform jacket remained folded on the table before him, a visual symbol of his dramatic stand. "Captain Harris, while we understand your concerns about the passengers' behavior, canceling an entire flight is an extreme measure," said Operations Director Frank Mitchell, his expression stern but not unsympathetic. "I made a judgment call based on the situation at hand," Harris replied calmly. "Federal regulations grant captains authority over their aircraft, including decisions regarding safety and welfare of passengers and crew." "This wasn't a safety issue in the traditional sense," countered another executive. "Respectfully, I disagree," Harris said. "When passengers are targeted based on their race, it creates a hostile environment that impacts everyone aboard." The situation was escalating, not de-escalating. The discussion was interrupted by a knock at the door. A young woman from the corporate communications team entered, looking slightly breathless. "Sorry to interrupt, but you all need to see this." She turned her tablet around, displaying a social media dashboard where videos of the incident were spreading rapidly across multiple platforms. The view counts were already in the hundreds of thousands and climbing. Comments overwhelmingly supported Captain Harris, with many users tagging the airline and demanding they stand behind their pilot. Number "I fly with Captain Harris" had emerged as a secondary trending topic. "This is going viral faster than anything we've seen before," she explained. "Major news outlets are picking it up. We're getting media requests from national programs." The executives exchanged concerned glances. What had begun as an isolated incident had transformed into a potential public relations crisis or opportunity, depending on how they responded. "We need to issue a more comprehensive statement," immediately decided the senior executive present. "And we need to decide on Captain Harris's status." While the corporate decision-makers deliberated, Jerome Washington had organized an impromptu gathering of supportive passengers in the terminal food court. Nearly 20 people had joined, sharing contact information and discussing the events they'd witnessed. "I'm creating an email list," Jerome explained. "If the airline tries to penalize Captain Harris, we need to be ready to speak up as witnesses." "Count me in," said the elderly man, who had earlier expressed his support to the captain. "Been flying 50 years and never seen such courage." "I'm a corporate attorney," offered a woman in a tailored suit. "I'd be happy to review any statements before they're sent." The spontaneous coalition represented a cross-section of the flight's passengers, different ages, races, and backgrounds, united by their respect for the captain's decision. Meanwhile, investigative journalist Zach Foster, who maintained a popular blog about the airline industry, had begun digging into Richard Keller's history. A quick public records search revealed a pattern. 3 previous complaints filed against different airlines, Foster muttered to himself, noting the details. All involving allegations of disruptive behavior, all mysteriously dropped after corporate intervention. He picked up his phone to call a source within Atlantic Airways' customer service department. By evening, the story had fully transcended the confines of the airport. Major news networks ran segments on the incident, social media continued to buzz with commentary, and Atlantic Airways' stock price had taken a noticeable dip in after-hours trading. In a hotel near the airport, Jasmine finally had a moment to process the day's events. Rebooked on a morning flight to Chicago, she sat on the edge of her bed watching coverage of the incident on television. "An unprecedented stand against discrimination," the anchor was saying. "The question remains, will Atlantic Airways support their captain's decision, or will commercial considerations prevail?" Her phone buzzed with a notification from her company's CEO. Not just her boss, but the chief executive of the entire marketing firm just saw the news. "Are you the Jasmine Reynolds involved in the flight incident today?" Before she could respond, another message followed. "The Williams Group CEO called me personally. They're impressed by our team's connection to this developing story. They want to meet with you specifically when you arrive in Chicago. This could be bigger than the original presentation." Jasmine stared at the screen, emotions conflicting. On one hand, she felt uncomfortable with her professional advancement potentially being tied to experiencing discrimination. On the other, perhaps this was how change happened when incidents like these affected business relationships and bottom lines. As night fell over Atlanta, the various participants in the day's drama found themselves in very different circumstances. Captain Harris received a call from his union representative advising him to make no public statements while the airline decided its official position. The Johnson family settled into their hotel room, fielding calls from relatives who had seen them mentioned in news reports. Richard Keller, released from security but banned from rebooking on Atlantic Airways, sat alone at an airport bar watching his name and face appear on the television news above. And in the airline's headquarters, executives debated until midnight about how to respond to a situation that was rapidly becoming a defining moment for their brand in the public consciousness. The story that had begun in the confined space of an aircraft cabin had expanded far beyond touching on deeper currents in American society and forcing each person involved to consider what values they truly stood for when tested. For Jasmine, staring at the ceiling of her hotel room as sleep eluded her, one question remained: what would tomorrow bring? 3 days after the dramatic cancellation of Flight 1382, Jasmine Reynolds stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Chicago hotel room watching the early morning sunlight glint off Lake Michigan. The city had awakened to another day, oblivious to the personal reckonings and corporate calculations still unfolding in the aftermath of what social media now called number captain stands. Her phone buzzed with a news alert: Atlantic Airways to hold press conference regarding discrimination incident. The airline had maintained a tense silence for the past 72 hours, issuing only brief statements confirming the flight cancellation and reiterating their commitment to investigating the situation thoroughly. Today, apparently, they were finally ready to announce their decision regarding Captain Harris. Jasmine's own professional life had taken a surprising turn. What should have been a routine business trip had transformed into something far more significant. Her inbox contained meeting requests from diversity officers at major corporations, speaking engagement inquiries, and most surprisingly, an expanded relationship with the Williams Group. Far from being disappointed by the missed presentation, the Williams executives had been impressed by what they called living your values. The contract Jasmine had been pursuing was now all but secured, with additional projects under discussion. Her phone rang, Jerome calling from his own hotel room down the hall. "Are you watching the news?" he asked, without preamble. "They're announcing the decision about Captain Harris at noon." "Just saw the alert," Jasmine confirmed. "What do you think they'll do?" Jerome sighed. "Hard to say. Public opinion is overwhelmingly on Harris's side, but you know how these corporations operate. They might decide making an example of him serves their long-term interests better than standing behind him. The optics would be terrible if they punish him," Jasmine pointed out. "Since when has that stopped them?" Jerome countered. "Remember what happened with that flight attendant in Texas last year? Public supported her company, fired her anyway." They fell silent, both contemplating the calculations being made in corporate boardrooms, far removed from the human realities of the situation. "I'm heading to the press conference," Jerome said finally. "A group of passengers is attending to show support. You coming?" "Wouldn't miss it," Jasmine replied. Across town in Atlantic Airways' Chicago corporate offices, CEO Margaret Blackwell reviewed the prepared statement one final time. At 62, with over 30 years in the airline industry, she had navigated countless crises, but few as potentially definitive as this one. "The statement reads well," she told her communications director, "but I'm still not convinced about the second paragraph. Are we certain about this direction?" "The board approved it unanimously this morning," the director replied. "The market research and social sentiment analysis all point to this being our best option." Blackwell nodded, though doubt lingered in her expression. "And Captain Harris, has he been briefed?" "He'll be arriving shortly. Legal wants a final review of his remarks before he speaks." "No," Blackwell said firmly. "No scripting him. That would only validate the criticism that this is all a corporate performance. If we're doing this, we're doing it authentically." The director looked uncertain but nodded. "As you wish, ma'am." Meanwhile, in a hotel room across the city, the Johnson family prepared for an appearance on Morning America. Their story, particularly 10-year-old Zoe's question about why they weren't welcome on the plane, had resonated deeply with the public. "Remember, you don't have to answer anything that makes you uncomfortable," Tamara told her children as she helped Zoe with her hair. "Just be yourselves." Keith adjusted his tie nervously. "Do you think we're doing the right thing going public like this?" Tamara paused, considering the question seriously. "I think staying silent when you've experienced injustice only perpetuates the problem. The kids need to see us stand up, just like Captain Harris did." Little Mason, still clutching his now famous dinosaur toy that had appeared in viral photos, looked up at his parents. "Is the mean man going to be on TV too?" "No, sweetie," Keith assured him. "He's trying very hard not to be on TV right now." Indeed, Richard Keller had disappeared from public view after being identified in the initial news coverage. But investigative reporters had been busy. That morning, the Chicago Tribune had published an exposé revealing a history of similar complaints against Keller at other airlines and in various hotels and restaurants. More damaging, Still, a former employee at Keller's firm had come forward with allegations of racist behavior in the workplace, claiming Keller had blocked the advancement of several qualified black employees. Meridian Financial, where Keller served as executive vice president, had issued a terse statement that they were investigating the allegations and taking them seriously. By 11:30 a.m., a crowd had gathered outside Atlantic Airways corporate headquarters. Journalists set up cameras while a group of passengers from Flight 1382, organized by Jerome, stood together holding handmade signs, "I fly with Captain Harris" and "Stand against racism." Jasmine arrived to find Jerome already there, speaking with several other passengers they recognized from the flight. "The Johnson family is doing a TV interview this morning," he informed her. "Their segment already aired. It was powerful." Zoe asked the host why some people don't want to sit near people who look like her, left the anchor speechless for a few seconds. At precisely noon, the doors to the building opened, and Margaret Blackwell emerged, flanked by several executives. Camera shutters clicked rapidly as reporters jostled for position. "Good afternoon," Blackwell began, approaching the podium. "Thank you for joining us today. 3 days ago, an incident occurred aboard Atlantic Airways Flight 1382 that has sparked important conversations about dignity, respect, and inclusion in commercial aviation. Today, I want to address both the specific incident and the larger issues it raises." She paused, surveying the assembled crowd. "After a thorough investigation, including reviews of statements from multiple passengers and crew members, we have determined that Captain Dwayne Harris acted within his authority as pilot in command when he made the decision to cancel Flight 1382 due to discriminatory behavior by a passenger that created a hostile environment." A murmur ran through the crowd. Jerome and Jasmine exchanged hopeful glances. "While we regret the inconvenience caused to other passengers, we support Captain Harris's judgment that the situation had escalated to a point where continuing the flight would compromise the dignity and comfort of those targeted by discriminatory behavior." She looked directly into the cameras. "At Atlantic Airways, we have always maintained a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. Today, we are taking that commitment further. I am announcing the creation of the Harris Protocol, a comprehensive training and response framework for addressing discrimination aboard our aircraft." The announcement drew scattered applause from the passengers present. This new protocol will provide clear guidelines for our staff on identifying, addressing, and documenting discriminatory incidents, as well as enhanced training for all customer-facing employees. Additionally, our contract of carriage has been updated to explicitly state that discriminatory behavior constitutes grounds for removal from an aircraft or denial of service. Blackwell's expression grew more solemn. "As for the passenger whose behavior precipitated this incident, he has been placed on our restricted travel list indefinitely." She paused again, then continued. "And now, I would like to introduce the person whose principled stand brought these issues to the forefront. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Dwayne Harris." A door opened, and Harris emerged, dressed in his full uniform with captain stripes. The crowd erupted in applause, with the Flight 1382 passengers cheering loudest of all. Jasmine felt unexpected tears stinging her eyes at the sight of him, dignified and resolute, as he approached the podium. "Thank you," Harris said, simply waiting for the applause to subside. "I want to begin by thanking Atlantic Airways and CEO Blackwell for their support. What happened on Flight 1382 was not about one captain or one flight. It was about the fundamental principle that every person deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of race, gender, religion, or background." He spoke without notes, his voice steady and clear. "Throughout my 15 years with this airline, I've had the privilege of flying thousands of passengers safely to their destinations. Safety has always been my primary concern, and that includes not just physical safety, but the basic human right to travel without facing discrimination or harassment." Harris paused, looking out at the faces before him. "The decision to cancel that flight was difficult. I knew it would inconvenience many innocent passengers, and for that, I remain truly sorry. But in that moment, I had to ask myself, what message would I send by proceeding as if nothing had happened? What would I be saying to the Johnson children, to Miss Reynolds, to Mr. Washington, and to every other person on that aircraft? In the crowd, Jasmine nodded silently, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. Some have called my actions extreme, Harris continued. Perhaps they were. But there are moments in life that demand we take clear, unambiguous stands, moments when the usual compromises and half measures fail to meet the moral demands of the situation. He straightened his shoulders. I don't consider myself an activist or a hero. I'm simply a pilot who made the decision I believed was right. I'm grateful to Atlantic Airways for recognizing that sometimes standing up for basic human dignity is not just compatible with our professional responsibilities, it's essential to them. As Harris concluded his remarks, the crowd erupted once more. Journalists shouted questions, but Blackwell stepped forward again, raising her hands for quiet. Captain Harris has been reinstated with full privileges and responsibilities, she announced. Furthermore, I'm pleased to share that he has been promoted to Senior Fleet Captain and will be involved in implementing the Harris Protocol throughout our organization. The press conference continued with a Q&A session, but for Jasmine and Jerome, the essential questions had been answered. They stepped away from the crowd, finding a quiet corner to process what they had witnessed. I didn't expect that, Jerome admitted. I thought they'd give him a slap on the wrist, at best fire him at worst. Public pressure made the difference, Jasmine observed. That, and Blackwell, having the courage to read the moment correctly. Jerome nodded. Speaking of reading the moment correctly, how's the Williams account? Better than we could have imagined, Jasmine replied. They're expanding the scope. Apparently being associated with this situation aligned perfectly with their brand values. So something good came of it all, Jerome mused. Many good things, Jasmine corrected him. The Harris Protocol, the public conversation, the Johnson children seeing justice done. As they spoke, their phones buzzed simultaneously with a breaking news alert. Breaking, Richard Keller resigns from Meridian Financial amid discrimination investigation. Jerome let out a low whistle. Consequences. Real consequences. It doesn't erase what happened, Jasmine said thoughtfully, but it does show that things can change. As they walked back to their hotel, they passed a television in a cafe window showing Captain Harris shaking hands with CEO Blackwell. The image captioned, "Airline takes stand against discrimination." It wasn't often in the constant noise of the 24-hour news cycle that a single moment of principle created such ripples. Both Jasmine and Jerome understood that the changes announced today, however meaningful, were just the beginning of a longer journey. But for now, in this moment, it felt like a significant step forward. 6 months after the events of Flight 1382, the grand ballroom of the Chicago Hilton hummed with the energy of 500 airline industry professionals gathered for the annual Commercial Aviation Excellence Awards. Among the recognitions for safety innovations and customer service achievements, a new category had been added, the Social Responsibility in Aviation Award. Jasmine Reynolds, now Vice President of Client Relations at her marketing firm, following the wildly successful Williams account, adjusted her name badge as she entered the ballroom. Beside her, Jerome Washington, recently promoted to Creative Director, whistled softly. Quite the turnout, he observed. Looks like every airline in North America sent representatives. After what happened with Atlantic Airways' stock price following the Harris Protocol announcement, they'd be fools not to, Jasmine replied. The airline's decisive stand against discrimination had initially caused market uncertainty, but the subsequent wave of positive publicity and customer loyalty had translated into a 15% stock price increase over 6 months. A remarkable performance in the typically slow-growth airline industry. As they made their way to their assigned table, Jasmine spotted familiar faces across the room, the Johnson family dressed in their finest attire. 10-year-old Zoe had become something of a youth ambassador for equity in travel, having spoken to several student groups about her experience. 7-year-old Trevor waved excitedly when he saw Jasmine, while 4-year-old Mason, still inseparable from his dinosaur toy, shyly hid behind his mother. Miss Reynolds, Mr. Washington, Keith Johnson called approaching with Tamara. So good to see you both. The children have been talking about seeing you all week, Tamra added warmly. Their conversation was interrupted by the dimming of lights signaling the beginning of the ceremony. As they took their seats, a distinguished woman in her 60s approached the podium. Margaret Blackwell, CEO of Atlantic Airways. "Good evening," she began. "It's my great honor to present the inaugural Social Responsibility in Aviation Award." She paused, surveying the room. The aviation industry has always prided itself on technical excellence and operational precision. These remain essential, but increasingly our passengers expect something more. They expect us to operate with moral precision as well. A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. 6 months ago, an incident aboard one of our flights forced a moment of reckoning within our industry. A single decision by one captain sparked a national conversation about dignity, respect, and belonging in commercial aviation. Today, I'm proud to report that 27 airlines have adopted versions of the Harris Protocol, training over 200,000 employees in recognizing and addressing discrimination. Blackwell gestured to a side entrance where Captain Dwayne Harris appeared resplendent in his uniform with newly added senior fleet captain insignia. The room erupted in applause as he made his way to the stage. Captain Harris's decision that day cost our airline approximately $230,000 in immediate operational losses. Blackwell continued once the applause subsided. But what it gained us in customer loyalty, employee pride, and moral standing has proven immeasurable. She turned to Harris. "Captain, your courage reminded an entire industry that our primary cargo isn't luggage or even people, it's human dignity. On behalf of Atlantic Airways and the Commercial Aviation Association, I present you with the inaugural Social Responsibility in Aviation Award." Harris accepted the crystal trophy with characteristic humility. As he stepped to the podium, the room fell silent. "Thank you, Ms. Blackwell, and thank you to everyone here tonight," he began. "I accept this recognition not for myself, but on behalf of every airline employee who has ever faced the difficult choice between operational convenience and moral clarity." He paused his gaze, finding the Johnson family in the audience. What happened 6 months ago wasn't about heroism. It was about something much simpler and more fundamental. The recognition that each of us has the power and sometimes the responsibility to say, "Not here, not now, not on my watch," when we witness injustice. Harris continued, his voice gaining strength. "The Harris Protocol isn't really about me, nor is it simply about preventing discrimination. At its core, it's about creating a culture where everyone understands that small acts of courage in everyday situations can transform our shared spaces, where the dignity of each person is recognized as non-negotiable." As Harris spoke, Jasmine reflected on how the ripple effects of that day had touched so many lives. Her own career had accelerated dramatically with the Williams account, now the cornerstone of her firm's portfolio. But more meaningful than the professional advancement was the shift in perspective, a renewed conviction that standing up for what was right could indeed make a difference. Meanwhile, Richard Keller had experienced quite a different 6 months. Following his resignation from Meridian Financial, an internal investigation had revealed a pattern of discriminatory practices that resulted in a class action lawsuit from former employees. Though Keller maintained his innocence, the evidence, including numerous emails and witness testimonies, painted a damning picture. Last Jasmine had heard he had moved to Florida to pursue other opportunities, his once sterling professional reputation permanently tarnished. Captain Harris's voice brought her attention back to the present. "The most meaningful change isn't measured in protocols or policies," he was saying. "It's measured in the experiences of real people." He gestured toward the Johnson family. "When 10-year-old Zoe Johnson asks me if things are different now, I can honestly tell her yes, because of her courage, her parents' dignity, and the thousands of people who refuse to accept that some forms of disrespect simply the cost of moving through the world in a black body." The audience rose in a standing ovation as Harris concluded his remarks. Even industry executives who had initially criticized his decision as operationally excessive now applauded, recognizing which way the cultural winds had shifted. As the ceremony transitioned to dinner, Jasmine found herself seated beside Captain Harris. "Congratulations, Captain," she said. "Though I suspect you're tired of hearing that by now." Harris smiled. "The recognition is appreciated, but the real victory is seeing actual change take place." He nodded toward the front of the room where a large screen displayed the Commitment to Dignity pledge that 27 airlines had now signed. "That wouldn't have happened if passengers like you hadn't spoken up afterward." "It was the least we could do," Jasmine replied. "You were the one who put your career on the line." Harris shook his head slightly. "I had a choice that day, we all did. Every passenger who spoke up, every crew member who supported the decision, every executive who ultimately endorsed it instead of punishing it. Change happens when enough people make the same choice at the same time." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a flight attendant. Jasmine recognized Brittany Cooper, who had been working the flight that day. "Captain Harris, Brittany said they need you for photos with the Johnson family." As Harris excused himself, Brittany took his vacant seat. "Miss Reynolds, I've been hoping to speak with you. I wanted to thank you for how you intervened with the Johnson children that day. That small act of kindness made a difference." "It didn't feel like enough at the time," Jasmine admitted. "That's the thing about moments like these," Brittany replied thoughtfully. "We never know which small act might be the one that prevents a situation from escalating further or helps someone feel less alone in a difficult moment." She glanced toward the Johnson family now posing for photos with Captain Harris. "For what it's worth, I think we all did the best we could that day. And look what came of it." Indeed, the transformation had been remarkable. Beyond the Harris Protocol and the industry-wide commitments, there had been personal growth for everyone involved. Jasmine had found her voice as an advocate within her company, helping launch a diversity initiative that had already improved recruitment and retention. Jerome had begun mentoring young Black professionals entering the marketing field. The Johnson children had turned a potentially traumatic experience into a lesson in courage and justice. As the evening progressed, Jasmine found herself in conversation with CEO Margaret Blackwell. "The Williams account has certainly flourished under your direction," Blackwell observed. "I hear they're expanding into 3 new markets with your firm leading the strategy." "News travels fast," Jasmine replied, impressed. "Yes, it's been an extraordinary opportunity." Blackwell smiled. "Not just news, I sit on their corporate advisory board. Your presentation on inclusive marketing was mentioned specifically at our last meeting." "I'm flattered," Jasmine said. "Don't be flattered, be encouraged," Blackwell replied. "What happened 6 months ago could have been just another viral moment, forgotten as soon as the next outrage captured public attention. Instead, it became a catalyst for lasting change, because people like you refused to let it fade away." As the evening drew to a close, Captain Harris took one final moment at the podium. "Before we conclude tonight's ceremony," he said, "I'd like to share some news. Next week, Atlantic Airways will launch a new cadet pilot program specifically designed to increase diversity in our flight decks. The first class of 20 cadets, 11 women, and 14 people of color, will begin their training journey toward becoming commercial pilots." The announcement drew enthusiastic applause. "My grandfather was a Tuskegee Airman," Harris continued, his voice thick with emotion. "He flew combat missions for a country that still seated him at the back of the bus. He told me once that courage isn't about grand gestures, it's about 1,000 small decisions to do what's right, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult." He raised his award slightly. "This recognition doesn't belong to me. It belongs to my grandfather, to the Johnson family, to Miss Reynolds and Mr. Washington, to every person who has ever summoned the courage to say, 'This isn't right,' in the face of injustice." 6 months later, Jasmine Reynolds boarded another flight to Chicago. The boarding process proceeded smoothly, passengers of all backgrounds moving through the cabin with the usual mixture of excitement and resignation that characterizes air travel. As she settled into her seat, she noticed a small plaque mounted near the cockpit door. It read simply, "On this aircraft, dignity is non-negotiable." A flight attendant noticed her reading the plaque. "That's new," she explained. "Part of the Harris Protocol implementation. Every aircraft in the fleet has one now." "It's a good reminder," Jasmine replied. The attendant nodded. "The funny thing is, we've seen a 60% decrease in disruptive passenger incidents since they were installed. Sometimes a small symbol can make a big difference." As the plane taxied toward the runway, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Good afternoon, everyone. This is Captain Dwayne Harris, welcoming you aboard Atlantic Airways Flight 1382 to Chicago." Jasmine smiled at the flight number, a deliberate choice, she was certain. "We'll be cruising at an altitude of 35,000 feet today," Harris continued. "Our flight attendants are here to ensure not just your safety, but your dignity throughout our journey together. We're honored to have you aboard." As the aircraft lifted into the sky, Jasmine gazed out the window at the sprawling city below, thinking about how far they had all come since that day 6 months ago when a canceled flight had started a movement. The world hadn't changed completely. Such transformations never happened overnight, but in this small corner of human experience, something meaningful had shifted. A single moment of courage had rippled outward, touching countless lives. And in that reality lay hope for all the changes still to come. The story of Flight 1382 teaches us that real change often begins with a single courageous decision. Captain Harris showed that standing up against discrimination isn't just a personal choice, it's a powerful catalyst that can transform entire systems. When he removed his uniform jacket and canceled the flight, he chose dignity over convenience, justice over protocol. We also learn that silence in the face of injustice only perpetuates harm. Every passenger who spoke up, from Jasmine offering puzzles to the elderly man supporting the captain's decision, demonstrated how small acts of solidarity matter. The Johnson children learned that they deserve respect not because someone granted it, but because it's their fundamental right. Perhaps most importantly, this story reminds us that institutional change is possible when enough people demand it. The Harris Protocol, the industry-wide commitments, and the new cadet program all emerged because individuals refused to accept discrimination as the cost of doing business. In our own lives, we too can be the pebble that creates ripples across the pond of injustice. When faced with discrimination, we always have a choice. We can look away for convenience's sake, or we stand firm like Captain Harris, knowing that dignity is non-negotiable. What moment in your life called for you to take a stand against racism? Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you had spoken up? Comment below with your experiences. If this story about fighting racism touched you, please hit that like button to help spread awareness. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful racism stories that inspire change, and share this video with someone who needs courage to stand against discrimination in their own life. Thank you for joining our community of changemakers. And remember, in a world where you can be anything, be someone who makes others feel they belong.